Constable's comments there about this being public health led, with any role for the police being a backstop one. Can I say a final word, actually, which I should have said in my initial answer, about the concerns of the airline industry, but I think the concerns about the tourist industry more generally. I absolutely understand that this is a sector that is already extremely hard hit by the impact of coronavirus, and the concerns that it will have about further restrictions to travel and tourism are well understood and completely understandable. But this is public health driven, and what I would say is none of us want arrangements like this to be in place for any longer than is absolutely necessary. So one other important aspect of an arrangement like this is how it is kept under review and how we exit from it as we continue to tackle the virus. One of the things I feel most strongly about, and always have done, and people will have heard me talk about this in many other contexts in the past, is that Scotland is an open, welcoming, tolerant country. We value having people coming to Scotland to live, to study, to visit, to enjoy everything that our beautiful country has to offer. And I can't wait for the day when we're back to a situation where that's the message I'm giving to the world. Please come to Scotland, because we want you here and we want you to see what our country has to offer. But these kinds of restrictions right now are because we need to make sure we suppress this virus and keep it suppressed, and be very vigilant for the different ways in which it could run out of control again. But none of us want these kinds of arrangements to be in place longer than is absolutely necessary. Alan Smith from Birr.
Good afternoon, First Minister. Speaking with Ewan Cameron on Radio Clyde this morning, you talked about Scotland having its own issues with racism. I just wondered if you could expand on that to perhaps the particular issues you're aware of within Scotland and what's been done about them. And a question for the Chief Constable. You talked about the house parties that you're telling people not to have, particularly this weekend with the wet weather. How do you police that? And do you expect people to phone police to raise concerns about their neighbours having house parties?
OK, I'll hand over to the Chief in a second. On my comments about racism, no country is immune from racism, and any country that is or thinks it has solved the problem is actually potentially making that problem worse by not recognising it and trying to properly address it. And Scotland is not immune from racism. I represent in Glasgow one of the most racially diverse constituencies in the country, and I see that very directly, but it's not just applicable to that geography. So we have to recognise that, and all of us have to recognise that every country has work still to do, and that is about discrimination, it is about abuse or prejudice. But the points I was making in my interview with Ewan Cameron were actually about some of the more structural issues that we have to deal with as well. And I made the point, which I'll make again here, is that I'm very privileged and have been privileged for more than 20 years now to be a member of the Scottish Parliament. I'm now First Minister in that Parliament. But the number of members from our minority ethnic communities that have been represented in that Parliament are tiny still. And there has never been a woman from our minority ethnic communities elected to be a member of the Parliament.
Aren't?
That's not good enough. And
what do you mean it's not good enough?
All of us as individuals and all of the different parties across Scotland have a real job to do there to put that right as quickly as possible. And as First Minister, I know this is something that the Permanent Secretary of the Scottish Government is very anxious to see progress on as well. We don't yet employ enough people from our minority ethnic communities, and this comes back to a general point that can be made about race, and I am making it about race, but it can also be made about gender and other groups within our society. If we don't have proper representation in the areas where decisions are made, then our societies are in danger of never getting to a point where we are truly and properly representative of all of the different...
Well, that's funny, because here we are again with some suggestion that the lack of ethnic minority representation, quote, quote, in Parliament indicates some form of systemic prejudice or discrimination or even racism. So we need to fast-track people into these positions of power in order for them to represent the people of the community that they are from. But yet the same can't be applied to a white man, for example, or an ethnic Scot, a concept that these people are deliberately pretending doesn't exist. Why is there not one ethnic Scot in that Parliament that's representing ethnic Scots? You would call that man a Nazi if he even attempted to try his arm in the political race to represent his people. But it's A-OK for the likes of Hamza Yusuf, the press, for more ethnic minority employees in the parliament. It's A-OK for Anas Sarwar to imply that councils are racist because there's not enough BME councillors. It's A-OK for thin lips to stand there and talk about Scotland being racist or lacking in terms of equality and diversity because there's not been a brown woman in parliament. So fucking what? If we're all one and diversity is a great strength, these people should have no issue staring at a near enough all-white parliament. But the fact of the matter is, that's where this problem emerges, isn't it? Because it's a lie. This garbage about diversity being a strength, this garbage about progression and inclusion, it's all a progressive lie. It's all bullshit conjured up by people who share a identical political ideology to the likes of thin lips. It's ridiculous. You want people in there to represent their own, but yet you won't allow the same for white Scots. And that's for the shit about racism and discrimination and bragging about being the most, representing the most diverse constituent in Scotland, the biggest shithole in Scotland, may I add. So because there's people from different backgrounds in Scotland, that automatically indicates that there must be racism and discrimination. Are you people that desperate to find something to complain about? You can't point to anything tangible, so you just make shit up. It's fucking ridiculous, man. This is the same woman who said that there's systemic institutional barriers stopping women from succeeding in life. You know, do you think I'm going to take anything that this woman has to say seriously in regards to racism and inequality? Disparities do not indicate racism. Disparities do not indicate systemic prejudice or anything of the sorts. But it's rather convenient for people like her to say that, because then it justifies their cancerous solution to said problem.
Our country. So we've all got work to do there, and none of us are perfect, and none of us always get this right, which is why, as we rightly now, and I don't shy away from this, I'm extremely critical of how the President of the United States is handling this particular moment in his...
And I'm particularly concerned about how you're handling it too, while we're on the subject, considering you're on the Black Lives Matter bandwagon as it goes. This is what, day 3 now, you banging on about it? Or your Rainbow Unicorn delegates are doing it? You've not once mentioned the violence that's taken place in the States. You've not once mentioned the murder, the murders, the blatant anti-white assaults that have taken place, all the businesses that have been looted and destroyed. You stand there at your podium and you grandstand and you go on about the right to protest peacefully, and you claim that these people are simply protesting the evils of racism. But yet Black Lives Matter and some of these people in the streets alongside Black Lives Matter are going out of their way to attack white people simply for being white, in some cases. Or so it appears anyway. You don't call that out though. Oh no, you won't fucking dare. You won't fucking dare call that out. No, you won't, because you're a hypocrite and you're a liar. You're going to stand there and talk about Donald Trump being racist. Nicola Thin Lips, grandstanding. Who's next on the hit list? It's Boris Johnson, he's a racist. Now it's Donald Trump. Or who isn't, according to Thin Lips?
Country's history and the what I would describe as the lack of leadership that he is showing. In being critical of that, we also have to look at our own countries and ourselves. And
oh yeah, because there's not enough brown people in our parliament, so we've got problems with racism, of course. That's that big brain take you've got going there.
Make sure that we are all trying to do the right things, and I think that's important for all of us. I'll hand over to the Chief Constable now for...
Having seen some of the vile behaviour of police officers in America, I was wondering what lessons have Police Scotland learned from this, and what have you told your officers who are going to be policing this weekend's anti-racism protest? To delve a bit deeper into your answer, First Minister, to Alan, it's obviously very welcome to hear your sort of acknowledgement of structural problems.
There's a lack of brown people in Parliament. Structural problems. That's what it is.
But have you taken any specific actions in light of recent events to tackle any institutional racism in government and Parliament?
Okay, I'll hand over to Chief Constable and then I'll answer your question. An initial discussion with the Permanent Secretary of the Scottish Government about how within the government we both address some of the underlying structural systemic issues in terms of
Systemic! It's fucking systemic! Is that so? Deep-rooted systemic inequality. Prove it! What, because there's a lack of brown people? So what are you going to do? How are you going to rectify that? Well, the only way to right that wrong is to put them in there, fast-track them. Diversity quotas, that type of thing.
representation in our own ranks, and I know that's something she is very keen to take forward with real pace.
Oh, I bet she is, because it's people like her that she's representing, am I right?
On the political side, while for reasons people will understand, my mind has not really been on electoral politics recently. My party is thinking very hard about how we deal with the challenge of underrepresentation within our party ranks and in the...
Fuck, man. The country is overwhelmingly white for the time being, and you Sadaks are sitting there crying about the lack of representation for ethnic minorities.
We elect into whether it's council chambers across the country or the Scottish Parliament, and these things will continue. What I would say, though, is I think it's important for all of us that we don't see, and particularly for people in leadership positions, that we don't see this as something that is just about this week or next week when these things are so high profile in the media. This is about how, on an ongoing basis, we address and make progress on all of these issues that have for far too long not progressed in the way that we would have wanted.
You mean? I'm sick of her using words like progress when she refers to her cancerous policies and ideology.
Them too. So this is, I hope, a catalyst moment in that, but it's what we are doing and the progress we are making, I guess, when the media glare is not as much on these things as it is now, that will be the measure of whether it has turned out to be that catalyst or not. And I'm sure that is true in the police, and I'm sure it is true in organisations the length and breadth of the country. Women are no less able, no less intelligent, no less capable of getting on in politics than men are. So the fact that we don't always have, broadly speaking, gender balance says that there are systemic institutional barriers to women progressing. And, I think that's why it's important to take concrete steps to overcome those barriers so that hopefully in the future these things are just what we take for granted and not the exception.